The first time Lyra Avenholm noticed something wrong in her family, it wasn't the shouting, it was the silence. It was the way conversations ended the moment she entered the room, the way her brother's eyes no longer lingered on hers when she spoke, the way their mother, a woman of relentless cheer, seemed to pause mid-sentence, weighing her words before letting them out. Lyra had grown up believing that blood was a fortress, a wall that nothing could break. That belief shattered the winter she turned 21. The Avenholm family was old money, not the glitzy kind that flaunted diamond watches, but the weathered, deep-rooted wealth that whispered through crumbling portraits and oak-paneled halls. They lived in the Ashwick Manor, a sprawling estate on the outskirts of Halewick, where the snow seemed to fall heavier than in the city, and the air carried the stillness of centuries. Lyra had always been the quiet one, preferring the dusty solitude of the manor's library over the bustling dinners her mother hosted. Her older brother, Corin, was her opposite, charming, loud, a natural favorite. Where Lyra blended into corners, Corin lit them up. They were close, once. The betrayal didn't arrive as a single blow. It crept in, drop by drop. It began with her father's will. He had died suddenly the year before, leaving behind a complicated web of assets, land, and trust. The will named both Lyra and Corin as heirs, but with conditions. Conditions that required trust, cooperation, and time. One snowy afternoon, she overheard them, her mother, Celine, and Corin speaking in hushed tones in the drawing room. "She's too soft for this," Celine's voice low but sharp. "She'll squander it." "She won't fight us," Corin replied, confident. "She trusts me." Lyra froze in the hall. She was supposed to inherit half the northern lands, along with the rights to the Ashwick forests, properties that had belonged to her father's side for generations. But in that moment, she understood. They were planning to take it from her. She told herself it couldn't be true. But over the next months, papers went missing. Letters from her father's solicitor never reached her. Meetings were scheduled without her knowledge. Corin began speaking about family business in the past tense, as though decisions had already been made. The breaking point came when she visited the solicitor herself, an older man named Heron, loyal to the family for decades. He looked at her with quiet pity when she asked about the estate. "I'm sorry, Miss Lyra," he said, sliding a thin file across the desk. "These transfers were approved with signatures I assumed were yours." Her own name signed in familiar ink stared back at her, but she had never held that pen. The shock ran deeper than anger. She had trusted Corin more than anyone, trusted him with secrets, with fears, with her belief that he would always stand at her side. Now she realized he had stood at her side only to guide her toward the edge. She confronted him that night in the East Wing hallway. Snow drifted against the tall windows, the candlelight throwing restless shadows across his face. "You forged my signature." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. Corin didn't deny it. He only sighed, as if disappointed in her for figuring it out. "It's better this way, Lyra. You were never built for this kind of responsibility." Her heart went cold. It wasn't yours to decide. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Everything I've done is for the family. You'll thank me one day." That night, she packed a small bag and left Ashwick Manor without a word. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't breathe in those walls any longer. For weeks, she lived in a small apartment in Halewick's East District, surrounded by strangers, the sound of trams rattling past her window at all hours. She replayed every conversation, every smile, every moment of trust with Corin, until they all felt like knives. It was in that solitude that the first ember of revenge began to burn. Not the kind of revenge that comes in a rush, all heat and impulse. No, Lyra's would be slow, cold, patient. She would dismantle Corin's world piece by piece, the same way he had dismantled hers. And when the time came, he would see her, really see her, for the first time. The first step was learning everything she didn't know. Lyra found work at a small law archive, filing dusty case documents and listening more than she spoke. She learned about asset trails, inheritance loopholes, how trust could be quietly drained without a single visible withdrawal. She learned the art of being invisible in a room full of people. She made connections not with the wealthy, but with those who served them, assistants, clerks, drivers, and maids. The people Corin would never think to notice. From them, she gathered scraps of information, little threads that, when woven together, began to form a map of his life. And she never once contacted him. Years passed. The Avenhome name grew in the city. Under Corin's control, the family's holdings expanded, properties renovated, old debts erased. He became the face of the old money elite, gracing society columns and charity galas. But Lyra knew the truth beneath the polish. She knew where the weak beams were in the grand house he was building. She knew which of his business partners disliked him, which debts he'd quietly rolled into new ventures, and which affairs he had buried deep to protect his perfect image. She didn't rush. Every secret was a seed, and seeds took time to grow. By the time Lyra turned 29, she was ready to start the first crack in his foundation. Not a dramatic blow, just a whisper. A forged letter slipped anonymously to one of Corin's more vindictive rivals, suggesting that his latest acquisition had been funded through questionable means. The rival took the bait. An investigation began, quiet and unofficial. Corin fought it off easily, of course, but not without losing a little shine from his reputation. And Lyra watched, unseen, as the first shadow crossed his smile. She wasn't just taking his wealth, she was dismantling his certainty, his belief that he could control every board on the chessboard. Every move she made would be small enough to dismiss, but deep enough to fester. The game had begun. 2 winters after she set the first crack in Corin's perfect image, Lyra had become a shadow in his life. Not present, not gone, just there. A name he never spoke aloud, but that floated around the edges of his thoughts like a ghost he couldn't quite remember seeing. She was careful to keep herself invisible, never directly confronting him, never allowing him to link any misfortune to her hand. But she was there in the wrong numbers appearing in a quarterly report, and the quiet rumor about a neglected tax filing, and the strange coincidence of a deal collapsing after he boasted about it at a dinner party. Corin dismissed each setback as bad luck, but the unease began to root itself in his mind. The second step of her revenge wasn't financial, it was personal. Corin's pride wasn't just in his fortune. It was in being loved, admired, and needed. So Lyra went after that. She befriended Amaris Veal, Corin's wife, without ever revealing her full identity. She met her at a gallery opening, introduced herself simply as Lyra, and spoke with an ease that disarmed Amaris instantly. Amaris, starved for sincere connection in a life of constant pretense, confided in her quickly. Over wine and quiet dinners, Lyra told Amaris about the loneliness of living in Corin's orbit, how she often felt like an ornament in a house full of strangers. Lyra listened, offering nothing but empathy. She never pushed, never hinted at her connection to Corin. She only became the friend Amaris had been missing. Through Amaris, Lyra learned more than she could have imagined. She discovered the cracks in Corin's marriage, the nights he didn't come home, the quiet arguments muffled behind closed doors, and she planted seeds, small ones. She would ask gentle questions. Do you ever feel like he doesn't see you? Or do you think he tells you everything? And then change the subject before Amaris could answer. Those seeds took root faster than Lyra expected. Meanwhile, Lyra cultivated other threads. She tracked down Corin's oldest friends, the ones he had quietly distanced himself from after climbing higher in society. Some had been slighted, others outright betrayed. Lyra approached them under other names, in other cities, always careful to keep her real identity hidden. She connected them to one another, reviving old grievances, fueling them with selective truths and carefully timed revelations. By the third year of her plan, Corin had begun to feel the strain. Invitations slowed. A few longtime allies declined his calls. Business partners began asking more questions before signing deals. And at home, Amaris had grown distant. The moment Lyra knew her revenge was truly working came one autumn afternoon when she followed Corin at a distance through Halewick's Market Square. He walked briskly, jaw tight, glancing over his shoulder more than once. He wasn't looking for her specifically, but he was looking for something, some threat he couldn't maim. It was the first time she had seen him uncertain. She escalated slowly. A letter, unsigned, left in his study drawer. Not everyone forgets. A phone call at midnight, silent except for the sound of breathing. A book from their childhood, one he had given her as a gift, left in his car, pages torn out at random. Nothing directly harmful, nothing that could be traced, but enough to keep him wondering. By the 5th year, Corin had begun drinking more heavily. His charm, still intact in public, was fraying in private. He grew impatient with Amaris, snapping at small things. He made mistakes in business, the kind born from distraction. Lyra, meanwhile, had become someone else entirely. The quiet, trusting girl who left Ashwick Manor was gone. In her place stood a woman who could smile warmly at a dinner table while knowing she had set a fire in the cellar the night before. Her most calculated move came in the 6th year. She let Amaris discover the truth, but not all of it. She allowed her to find out about one of Corin's affairs, arranging for the proof to be left where Amaris would stumble across it. The shock drove a wedge between them that even Corin's apologies couldn't bridge. Amaris confided in Lyra more than ever, and though Lyra never revealed her own betrayal, she began guiding Amaris toward a life beyond Corin. She introduced her to people who could help her set up her own accounts, her own home. When Amaris finally left him, it wasn't with rage. It was quiet resolve. That hurt Corin more than screaming ever could. But Lyra wasn't done. The financial blows began to land harder now. An investment that collapsed after a key backer pulled out. A lawsuit from an old associate. Whispers of irregularities in the northern lands, the very ones he had stolen from her. Corin fought each battle, but they wore him down. His once perfect image now carried hairline fractures. And still, he didn't know who was behind it all. Lyra's patience had been her sharpest weapon. She had learned to savor the waiting, to find satisfaction not in a single strike, but in the steady erosion of everything Corin valued. By the 7th year, she was ready for the final stage. It would be the most personal blow yet, one that would not only ruin him, but leave him standing in the ruins, wondering how it had all happened. She would make sure that when he finally saw her again, he would realize she had been there all along. Winter in Halewick had a way of making even the grandest houses feel small. The snow dulled the edges of the city, muffling sounds, hiding imperfections beneath its white weight. Corin's house looked like a monument to his own decline. Lights burning late into the night, curtains always drawn. The once bustling dinner parties were a distant memory. Amaris was gone, his circle fractured. The rumors about his failing ventures had grown louder than his denials. Lyra decided the time had come. The final act of her plan would not be rushed. She began with a letter. This time, it was signed. It arrived in an ivory envelope, hand-delivered to Corin's study. Inside, a single sheet of paper bore her name in black ink. No explanation, no accusation. Just, "It's time we spoke." She didn't need to give an address. He knew. Ashwick Manor had stood empty for years, its windows shuttered, its gates chained. But it was theirs once, and he would know exactly where she was calling him. The night he came, the snow was falling in heavy, wet flakes. Lyra sat in the drawing room, firelight flickering against the faded wallpaper. She had lit no other lamps. The shadows were part of the stage she had built. When the door opened, Corin stepped in looking older than his years. His coat hung loose, his eyes were rimmed red, and the confidence he once wore like armor was nowhere to be seen. They stood in silence for a long time. Then he said her name, almost a question. "Lyra?" She didn't rise to greet him. "You've been busy," she said evenly. He gave a bitter laugh. "If you've come to lecture me, save it. I've had enough people tell me what's wrong with my life." "You haven't had the right person tell you." Corin's gaze swept the room, his eyes catching on details he hadn't seen in years. The worn rug, the chipped mantle, the indent in the armchair where their father used to sit. "This house," he said, "was never meant for you. You couldn't handle—" "It wasn't yours to take," she cut in. He flinched, just slightly. For the next hour, she didn't yell. She didn't throw accusations like stones. She simply told him the story of the last 7 years, the whispers in his ear, the cracks in his business, the friendships rekindled just to turn against him, the affairs revealed at precisely the right moment. And as she spoke, she watched the realization sink in, the small tightening of his jaw, the way his hands trembled when she described things he thought only he knew. "You did this," he said finally, voice low. "Yes." "All of it?" "Yes." He sank into the chair opposite her, head in his hands. "You've destroyed me." "I've taken back what you stole. The rest?" She let the words hang. "That was just interest." Corin's silence stretched. When he looked up again, there was something almost childlike in his expression. "Why?" he whispered. For the first time, her voice wavered. "Because you left me with nothing, and I wanted you to understand what nothing feels like." She rose then, walking past him toward the door. "It's over, Corinne." But as she reached for the handle, his voice stopped her. "Is it?" She turned. His eyes were different now. Not pleading, not broken, but calculating. "You think I can't rebuild?" he asked. "You think this is the end of me?" And in that moment, Lyra realized the cost of her revenge. She had taken everything from him, except his will to fight. She had spent years weaving his downfall, but in doing so, she had kept him alive in her own mind every single day. He wasn't the only one trapped in this dance. The days after their meeting were colder than any winter she could remember. Lyra left Ashwick Manor again, this time not with the satisfaction she had imagined, but with the hollow ache. She had won, there was no denying that, but her victory tasted of ash. She had become something she didn't fully recognize. The girl who once dreamed of starting fresh was gone. In her place stood someone defined entirely by the man she had destroyed. And Corinne? He never spoke her name in public. He sold what remained of his holdings, disappeared from Hillwick's society, and left whispers in his wake. But Lyra knew, in the way that you just know some things, that he was somewhere, planning. Maybe his plans would fail. Maybe they wouldn't. Either way, her life would never be entirely hers again. It was the perfect revenge. And it was the perfect prison.